Hello, welcome to the Bigger True Show. I am Scott McMahon, and I am excited for this show. I apologize for starting late today. I'm doing so because I was working as a poll challenger this morning, and hang on, let me. All right, my seat had sunken. um, so I was working as a poll challenger, and down in Detroit at the absentee county polling boards or counting boards, and um, so I was doing that for the Republican Party, and so I'm not supposed to talk about much about it publicly, but um, I want to share a few things, few observations. One is that super impressed with uh, the RNC and Michigan Republican Party. That there could not be a more stark comparison between now and 2020. And I wasn't involved in, yeah, I voted Republican. I voted for Trump in 16, but um, yeah, I wasn't involved, so I wouldn't be able to speak to what was different then, but, having seen some of what, happened in 2020 personally, and talked to many people and where we're at now, it is just night and day. And we had so, uh, it was a recent decision, apparently it's provided for in state law to start counting the absentee ballots early. And so they started counting them today. So they're actually in Detroit now, and this isn't statewide, but it's kind of, I guess it's up to the local clerk. But in Detroit, they are now counting the absentee ballots. Now, I definitely feel uneasy about that because it does potentially give access to information about the current status to people who I believe have demonstrated their untrustworthiness, primarily our Secretary of State, with that information. She is clearly exceptionally partisan and um and very, very dangerously so. And um and so, she if she has access to the early vote tallies before election day, I think that's very dangerous information for her to have access to. So yeah, that's a problem, but it's where we're at. And we can't change the state laws a week before the election. Can't change them even months before the election. And I've been saying that for some time. We've got to win with what we've got. And Trump's saying the same thing. He says we've got to be too big to rig. So we're going to be. So yeah, it was a good experience. There was one that I was talking to this one ballot that I was talking to the supervisor about challenging. It was being duplicated. One vote on there. It was a Democrat ballot, anyways. I mean, they were voting all Democrats, but there's one item on there that it was unclear who the voter actually intended to vote for is being duplicated because they didn't know how to follow directions and they circled the names rather than fill in the circles. Uh, but um, yeah, I mean, everything that I saw was according to state law. I was looking at the signatures as well as I could, and yeah, obviously we don't have anything to compare them to. Their signatures aren't checked there; they're checked by the local clerk before they get to the uh, absentee ballot counting center. But yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's a good process, and um, it's slow. But today was kind of. I think it was intended to be a slow day. So I will be going back to challenge uh, a couple more times before this is over. And uh, yeah, I would recommend it to anyone that has doubts or questions about the election process, is to challenge, or even better, to work the polls. There were I could tell that there were Republicans working the polls there. It was less than 50%, but there were Republicans at most of the tables, so that was really good. Um, and yeah, just the process was the supervisors were really making an effort to be transparent and friendly, and it was, I'd say overall it was a very good process. But even more so, the RNC and the Michigan Republican Party had a huge presence, and so that's just really impressive. They've got a lot of attorneys involved in every swing state, and Michael Watley, who is the chair of the RNC, he was the general counsel of the RNC, and before that, he was the state party chair in North Carolina, and he was really primarily responsible for flipping North Carolina from blue to red, and he is just doing a great job of leading the RNC. He's been attacked a lot by the Flynn cult, and I think completely wrongly so. And so I just want to give props to Michael Watley and Laura Trump and their whole team at the RNC. Now, I want to share this clip that I shared. I actually shared it this morning. I apologize. My dog's barking in the background. There's not much I can do about that unless I stop the live show. I'm home alone right now. So, um, the, all right. So I posted this clip this morning and I'm going to go ahead and share it. This is a recording from an X space on the night that after just a couple hours after the jury convicted Trump of in a sham trial of the 34 counts of felony, whatever they called, when Cohen uh, gave some money to what's her face, the blonde stripper, um, and so it was over that. It was over that conviction, and Flynn went on this X space that I was listening to live, and I recorded it, and here it is.
GOP is worthless, pathetic, and if I didn't think that we would lose this country, I would immediately and thought that we could start another party to fucking take it back. I would, but right now we have what we have, which is a pathetic Republican Party and pathetic Republican leaders.
Yeah. So, um, and this is, I think, a window, and there was a lot more of that, but this is just kind of a highlight clip. The entire thing, he was trying to just incite hatred towards the Republican Party. And he did endorse the Patriot Party, which was an effort to try to replace the Republican Party. And yeah, they don't really talk about it being a third party. This all goes back to something that I talked about in my Tulsa presentation, which was the three-part plan that was posted on Facebook by an associate of Flynn's named Mark Zaid, who's a spy attorney. He's been in Washington, D.C., very high powered attorney with a security clearance for 30 years. And he posted a three-part plan. The first part was to fracture the Republican Party. Second part is to split off the far right within the party to form a third party, which obviously would weaken the Republican Party so that it could no longer compete with the Democrats. And then the third would be to replace the Republican Party with a new national security party. And that was spelled out. And the thing is that in order to summarize a big, complex plan, multi-year plan in 3 easy steps like that, 3 simple steps, it takes a lot of work. This isn't just something that you just think, "Okay, I'm gonna do this now. Yeah, I'm just gonna let's see what I end up writing and tweeting today." No, I mean, there was a lot of thought behind that message, and, the timing of that message is that he posted that just 3 weeks after Flynn joined Trump's first presidential campaign in 2016, and that's really significant. Um, so, um, that's a big part of what they're trying to do. They're trying to destroy the Republican Party. That's how I got into all of this research, was looking at why is the Republican Party why was the Republican Party in Michigan so divided? And as I looked into the causes of that, I discovered that this is a nationwide pattern. It's happening in state parties all across the country. And in every state, the operatives have some connection to um, Mike Flynn, Patrick Byrne, Roger Stone, Mike Lindell, those people, and their organizations. And often there are financial ties. There are certainly personnel ties, relationship ties. So, but there's a big confusion. When I posted this, I had a lot of questions on on X today, and I wanted to address some of those questions before I move on to the next point, the next topic. Um, so there's a lot of confusion about what the Republican Party is. And I said in there that, that these that that they try to whole Flynn network and the whole Flynn, a lot of the Flynn network was on this call. You can see them right here. There's I don't even need to list them. But I mean, you know who they are. They're the podcasters and the personalities that adore Flynn and that often host him on his shows. Flynn never goes on any sort of media appearance that's going to ask even remotely challenging questions. And um, so the Republican Party is there. There are rhinos, and I said this in my presentation in Tulsa. I think there are rhinos, and there are people like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and John McCain, people who say that they're Republicans, but they do not represent the will of their Republican constituents or really any of their constituents. And um, so they say they're going to do one thing and then they do a completely different thing. And that whether that's because of financial, corruption from lobbyists, whatever the cause is, I I don't dispute that there's no such thing as that there are rhinos. There are elected rhinos. Where there is power and wealth to be gained from corruption, there will be corrupt people. As until Jesus returns, we're gonna experience that. We're gonna have an imperfect government, and that's just the way it is. And so, what we have to focus on trying to make it a little bit less perfect. We're never gonna make it perfect. Or less imperfect. That's really the best we could hope for is less flawed. Um, and and it's worthy of our effort to try to do that, to try to be less imperfect, less flawed, less problematic. And so, we want to work towards that in an incremental way. So there are elected rhinos, but when there's what people don't seem to understand is they say that, okay, well, those rhinos are Republicans, and so that means that you need to get all the rhinos out of the party. But elected officials are a tiny part of the party, and they almost never get involved in intra-party matters. So there is the Republican Party is actually there's a bunch of different parties. So there's the RNC, which is the National Republican Party, and then there's the state GOPs and state Republican parties, and each state has its own Republican Party. It's its own organization with its own bylaws or rules or whatever they call them. Sometimes it's state statute that governs the political parties in the state. Every state has different rules and they're structured a little bit differently, which is one of the really confusing things for a reporter like me to cover things that are happening in state Republican parties all across the country. They it's set up differently in every state. And then within each state, there are district parties and there are county parties. And sometimes the county parties are bigger than the district parties, and sometimes the districts are bigger than the county parties. So, there's but for example, here in Michigan, we have 83 um, county parties, and and we have 13 congressional districts, and we have one state party. So we have all these different parties, and each one has its own bylaws. The county parties, many of them have very different bylaws from each other, and so they all have their own autonomy, but they're also within the umbrella of the whole organization. And they are all within if you're on the RNC, you have to be elected to be on the RNC. There's a committee man, committee woman, and the state party chair are the three representatives from each state on the RNC. They call it the 168 because there's 168 voting members of the RNC. And then there's each state party has, they have their own state committee and all this. They are all volunteer positions. And this is something that people don't seem to really think about or understand. All of these positions are volunteer positions. Now, there are people who tend towards, um, who are moderate Republicans. There are people who are uh, far, more kind of strict conservatives. There are people who are Muslim Republicans. There are people who are Christian Republicans. There are people who are atheist Republicans, and they all come in, but they find common ground in maybe not even all, but much of the Republican Party platform, and they come together. And the purpose of the Republican Party, which most people don't seem to understand, is to elect Republicans. Now, it sounds really simple, but most people, even most precinct delegates that I have seen, and largely thanks to Dan Schultz, who is a propagandist, and he is wrong. He is absolutely 100% wrong about what the purpose of the Republican Party is and what the purpose of the precinct delegate or committeeman is. Um, and because the purpose is to help to elect Republicans. It's a position of responsibilities. It's a position to work. It's not a position of rights. It's not a position of power. And there's no wealth that comes to precinct delegates. And so there are no rhinos. There are no rhinos in the Republican Party. I have yet to meet a single rhino within the Republican Party. So there may be elected Republicans who are rhinos, but there are no rhinos within the party. So it's a long explanation, but I think it's very, very important. Now, the RNC, and this is kind of inside baseball, but I think it's important. And the Republican Party, I really believe that the Republican Party is the best solution to our political problems. I think it's the only solution to our political problems. And on Joe Rogan's show, Trump said essentially the same thing. I mean, he talked about how he had thought about running third party a long time ago, like back in the 90s. He had thought about joining I think the Reform Party or something like that. And he decided against it because we have a two-party system. And you can complain about the two-party system all you want, but I think that it's actually pretty good. I mean, if you compare our two-party system to the lots of party systems in other countries, I really don't know that other countries have it any better than we do. I mean, I think the grass is always greener on the other side. I think what we have is a pretty good system, and the Republican Party is the party of the Constitution, is the party of freedom. It's the party of our Bill of Rights, and it is the party of the majority of Americans. It's certainly the party of the majority of counties by far. But so that is the Republican Party, and I talk a lot about the Republican Party because the Republican Party is very much under attack, and I think that it's been Flynn's primary target since he left the DIA under Obama. He was a lifelong Democrat. He didn't join the Republican Party until 2021 when he became a precinct delegate in Florida, in Sarasota, in order to try to take over the county party there and try to take over the state. And Florida is really struggling because of Flynn. And they see it in the last election. All of Flynn's candidates in Sarasota County lost really bad, including his own sister. So all of that is good news. All right, so now I want to get into the Madison Square Garden thing because this rally that he had, I think it was historic, and I think it just and it shows the differences between the candidates and between the parties. The Democrat Party was, what a lot of what Flynn is trying to do to the Republican Party is exactly what was done to the Democrat Party over the last 20 years. They using with the help of the media, the Democrat Party was clearly infiltrated, and they moved the goalposts further and further to the left. I guess that's your right, further and further to the left, and um, and demanded absolute allegiance as they did so. So if you didn't follow those goalposts, you were declared not a Democrat. You were ostracized and you were, forced out. That's exactly what happened to the Democrat Party. That's how the Democrat Party became the Communist Party. That's how the Democrat Party came to be the party of, um, you know, exposing children to transgenderism and all kinds of and pedophilia and all kinds of terrible stuff. It became the party of, of men in women's locker rooms. It became the party of, um, abortion even after birth, and just such tremendous evils that even 10 years ago would have been seen as just like that's just not right, even by most Democrats. And yet here we are. This is the Democrat Party. And even today, now the Democrat Party really truly is the party of hate. And Flynn is trying to make the Republican Party into the party of hate. And um and we need to resist that. We really need to resist that. And I think that that is the underlying message of today's show. And I'm going to try to weave this in is we need to insist as individuals, as Americans, as people, and you may or may not support the Republican Party, and that's okay. Um, but we need to embrace love, not hate. And that sounds so simple and cliche, but it is very, very clear. There is so much hatred in this country today. I see more hatred now in the Republican Party and on the political right than I've ever seen, and it really, really bothers me. I'm seeing more anti-Semitism than I have ever seen in this country, on the right and on the left, and it's terrifying to me. It needs to stop. And I'm seeing more hatred towards people that you just disagree with. It's crazy. So, you know, um, like Mike Gill called me CIA. Apparently that is an insult to Mike Gill because he uses that against everybody that he disagrees with. Everybody that Mike Gill disagrees with is obviously CIA. But, there's just and the hatred that, I've had one of his followers, who's clearly is a cult follower, and she she told me that I'm not a Christian I, um, because I disagree with Mike Gill, apparently. So I don't see where in my Bible it says that I need to agree with a non-Christian in order to be a Christian. It's just absurd. But, the hatred, and the number of times and the hatred from professing Christians within the Republican Party is just it's disturbing. It's this is it's disturbing. So, but the hatred from the left is even more disturbing. And so I'm going to start here with the way that the left, because and this is a common tactic where they do everything they can to prevent their own people. And Flynn did this exact same thing in Oklahoma, sharing a Christ denying hit piece against me, claiming that I am now who I was before I was ever saved. Written by a guy named Brian Ferentz, who is, I believe he is an actual warlock. Like I believe he actually practices witchcraft, and who uses the Bible as a weapon to incite hatred. And he is wildly unpopular, even in Arizona, and yet people are completely afraid of him because he's evil. He is, objectively hateful and evil. And those who hate, that is evil. And we need to check ourselves, check our own heart for hatred. Even with Flynn, I think I hate what he's doing. I think what he's doing is terrible. Even Brian Ferentz, I don't hate him, and I refuse to hate him. I refuse to hate anyone. And I think that that's a really important thing. If we allow our hearts to be marred with hatred, and if we fall in when we fall into hatred, we are so easily manipulated. So, and that's what the left is doing. So let's see this.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within.
So, okay, so you see that. So they're claiming, this is MSNBC, claiming that because he's doing this in Madison Square Garden, he's holding this rally at Madison Square Garden, and 85 years ago, so this is their logic. This is the limit of their logic. Because he is holding this in Madison Square Garden, and because 85 years ago in Madison Square Garden, there was a rally for Adolf Hitler. Therefore, Trump is Hitler. There's a couple other streams here. You know, there's this lie about Trump wanting to use the military to oppose his political enemies, which the Democrats have obviously done. I mean, they're using the courts, they're using the military even against us. They used the military against Republicans who didn't want, you know, most of whom were Republicans who didn't want the clot shot. And you know, there is, they used the military even against us on January 6th by not allowing the 10,000 guards. Charlie Flynn was responsible for not allowing the 10,000 National Guardsmen to come. So, hello, Kat. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. So yeah, so this is just evil. Now let's see how their lead candidate, what she did this is just a couple days ago.
Should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again. Never again. Never again.
Okay, so that is hatred. And that seems to be their entire platform. I mean, you could just see it on her face. I mean, if she could have spat blood, she would have. I mean, that was just pure and total hatred. Now let's see what Tim Walz said about, and he was saying this about Madison Square Garden.
Trump has descended into madness over the last few weeks. And I think some of you don't miss on this. Go do your Google on this. Donald Trump's got this big rally going at Madison Square Garden. There's a direct parallel to a big rally that happened in the mid-1930s at Madison Square Garden. And don't think that he doesn't know for 1 second exactly what they're doing there.
Okay, so the Democrat Party, National Party, held their national convention in Madison Square Garden 3 times. So does that mean that there's a parallel there too? I mean, that's just, the logical absurdity is just mind blowing. But this is what they wanted their people to think about, so that they wouldn't think about what was actually happening in Madison Square Garden. And I talked to somebody, a friend of mine yesterday, spent 8 hours watching the whole thing. And it was an amazing event. I spent about an hour here before the show watching highlights and several of the talks. I want to share 3 pieces. So I'll share this one first. This is a little less than 2 minutes. It's and maybe it's a story that you've heard before. He told this story. The same gentleman told the same story at the national convention, but I think it's worth watching.
On November 20th, 1974, my father suffered a massive heart attack and died. I went to this Q Forest school, the same school as our president, Trump, attended. 3 days after my father's burial, there was a knock on the door. One school morning, about 7 a.m. I answered the door. There was a very distinguished gentleman standing in front of me, and he said, when I opened the door, "Kid, call your mom down, please." I called upstairs to my mom. "Mom, there's some guy here, please come down." And she came down. And he said to her, "I'm very sorry to hear about Joseph Rem's death. I'm Fred Trump, Donald's father." And my mom said, "Yes, I know Donald Trump went to Q Forest School." He said, "Yes, Mrs. Rem, but what you probably don't know is that I'm still on the Board of Trustees. And this morning, I let Philip Rogers, who's the headmaster at Q Forest School, know that from this day forward, I, Fred Trump, out of my own pocket, is going to be paying for your 3 children's tuition at Q Forest, because I don't want the kids to have to go back into the public school system." Now, who would do that except the President Trump's father? And the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree.
Sorry. I think you can hear me now. I accidentally touched the mute button. Okay, I can hear myself, so I think you can hear me. So I think that that's an important clip and it's an important story, especially at this time in Madison Square Garden, when the left is trying to draw all these parallels between Trump and Hitler. The Democrats, I've talked to Democrats before, and believe it or not, Republicans and Democrats can't talk to each other. And I've had even civil conversations with Democrats about Trump, at least to a point. There's a point at which their hatred just gets the best of them. But and the line is, well, Trump, we know, you ask, okay, well, how do you know Trump's a racist? Because they say, well, Trump's a racist. How do you know Trump's a racist? Well, because his dad's a racist. And I don't know if Fred Trump was a racist or not, but it's pretty clear that Donald Trump's not a racist. I mean, it's a silly accusation. I mean, the accusation of racism, it's a matter of the heart. And, Jesus talked about, removing the log from our own eye before we can try to remove the speck from our neighbor's eye. And you can't solve racism with hatred. I mean, the problem of racism is it's a form of hatred. And when the left is completely consumed and all they have is hatred, that's all they have. That's their only hope, is that their voters will be motivated enough by hatred of Trump to get out and vote in numbers, and that they can cheat and squirm and steal and whatever to get across the finish line, and that they can get enough illegal immigrants voting, and and just by whatever means, that some combination of hatred and criminal activity can get them the win. That's all they've got. And we can't be like that. We just can't. And this whole event was, it was a love fest, the entire event. Let's look at Tulsi Gabbard here.
Join me as I say these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So, this is what there's a lot of talk about unifying the country. And I would say that what Tulsi Gabbard just opened there with is the same thing that unified our founding fathers didn't all agree. I mean, there was a lot of dissent, and there were some fierce arguments. I mean, there was um there, there was a lot of argument about whether or not we should even have a constitution, whether or not we should have, you know, just be independent states and not even have a federal government. And there was so much disunity, and yet they came together around the idea that there are certain truths that are self-evident that are worth coming together for. And we need to embrace that on a personal level. And if we are holding and harboring hatred in our hearts in any way, we can't do that. Because what hatred is it's a denial of others' inalienable rights. It's saying, hatred is, I mean, Jesus says it's murdering someone in their own heart, in our own heart. And so I think this is for all of us. This is really a message for all of us. And so we can't say that we are a constitutionalist if we hate anyone. There are so many people that I have seen within the Republican Party, precinct delegates that have been brought in by the Flynn Network, by the Steve Bannon marketing thing, with Dan Schultz saying that we can save this country by taking over the Republican Party and kicking out all the rhinos. And there's so much rhino hatred that people are indoctrinated in. There's so much anti-Semitism on the right and on the left. And this anti-Semitism on the right is a new thing, and it's got to stop. Jennifer says, you don't want the people who aren't supporting a criminal to know that I'm voting for the candidate who tried to illegally disenfranchise their votes and then got charged with crimes for it. I don't want the people who aren't supporting a criminal. I'm not really sure. You're welcome to say that in another way, because I'm not really understanding what you're saying there. Yeah, I think there are things that are worth coming together for, and that is protecting not just my freedoms, but all of our freedoms. Making sure that this experiment continues. Freedom of speech for everyone, including those that we disagree with. Refusing to hate people that we disagree with. I mean, that's just, it seems like such a basic thing, but it's so uncommon to see people actually disagree with each other in a cordial, friendly, and mutually considerate way. All right. I want to go to Tucker now.
Because it's not there. I've spent a lot of time with Trump. And there's not one moment I've ever been with him off camera where he's spending his time grousing about people he hates. Ever. He's talking about the people and the country he loves in his private time. Trust me. And people know, in a country that has been taken over by a leadership class that actually despises them and their values and their history and their culture and their customs, really hates them to the point that it's trying to replace them, they know someone who actually has affection for them, and that's Donald Trump. And it's requited. It's requited. They know. When he goes to McDonald's and serves fries, like, he's not faking that at all. That's why that worked. Democratic media consultants are like, how is that working? Because it's real. That's why. And the second reason that people love Trump, and I put myself in this category, it's why I'm here today, is because he's liberated us in the deepest and truest sense. And the liberation he has brought to us is the liberation from the obligation to tell lies. Donald Trump has made it possible for the rest of us to tell the truth about the world around us. And that's the single most liberating thing you can do for people. If you want to enslave people, if you want to degrade them, force them to tell lies. And they have. They forced us to lie about everything at gunpoint, effectively. They put people in prison for refusing to lie. And not just the obvious lies that men can become women or Vladimir Putin blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. No, honestly, he did. January 6th was an insurrection. They were unarmed, but it was very insurrection-y. Not even the obvious ones, but the big lie. You know what the big lie is? The big lie is that they're impressive. That's what the big lie is. That the people in charge have somehow earned the right to rule over you, and they haven't. And you know that. These are the single most useless people in the United States. They have no skills whatsoever. They've got 3/4 of the money, and they didn't earn it. They set up a system precisely for the purpose of awarding themselves wealth and power when it's undeserved. You look at Liz Cheney and you ask yourself honestly, what skill could she possibly have that allowed her to send hundreds of thousands of people to their deaths? Did she earn that? I don't think she did. No fair system would make Liz Cheney powerful. No fair system would make Larry Fink rich. No fair system would elevate someone like Kamala Harris to a presidential nomination. She's never been accused of doing anything useful. She has precisely no achievements. She's a nominee without getting a single vote. She is a metaphor for the system they created to make themselves rich and powerful, and then they have the gall to lecture you, the people who can actually change a flat tire and repair a power grid, who have useful jobs, who pay your taxes and work 40 hours a week, lecture you that you are somehow immoral.
Right. So, and his whole talk, I think, is really good, and definitely recommend if you haven't watched any part of that. I think it's worth watching. Now, I want to get into, and the thing about this Madison Square Garden event, this was a very, it was a really big deal. There were 20,000 people inside, and there were another 75,000 people outside. So 100,000 people came. They didn't need to have buses. They didn't need to have paid extras. They didn't need to try to, make people think that they were going to a Beyonce concert and then walk out halfway through as soon as Beyonce left the stage after not even having sung a song. And the Democrats don't understand. And it's because this is what's really on the ballot. This is love versus hate. That's what's on the ballot. And they do everything they can to try to convince their followers to hate Trump, to truly, truly hate him. And it's really worked. And they've used lies and all kinds of stuff. And I think that, I spend most of my time trying to understand and expose an infiltration, an insurgency within the Republican Party that is trying to get other Republicans to hate each other. And because I think that it's absolutely wrong, and it is just like Tucker's saying, it's immoral, and it's not who we are. And it's interesting that you don't see Democrats doing that. I mean, at least I don't. I don't spend that much time. I'm not immersed in the landscape of voices within the Democrat media anywhere near the way I am within the conservative media. But so much of the media on the right is oriented and aimed towards trying to get us to hate people. And that's what I think that's really what the majority of the Flynn Network, what I call the Flynn Network, which is all these voices around Flynn, Roger Stone, Patrick Byrne, the Clay Clark media empire that he's created there, of all these so-called independent podcasters that are they're all beholden to the people at the top, and it's kind of a pyramid scheme. It is what it is. So I want to move on just briefly, and I'm going to close with this, with a segment that I haven't seen people talk about from the Joe Rogan Trump podcast, and this is the part that impressed me the most. And if you haven't listened to the whole podcast, I definitely encourage it because it's great. It's just a great conversation, and some of the things that I thought were just the most fun were listening to Trump talk about the things that he's personally passionate and knowledgeable about. Things like concrete and and getting permits and things for, like, for nuclear power plants, and the permitting process, and working with, um with working with the government as a businessman, and what it took to, he was the first president that I know of that actually he was not a politician, and he was not in the armed services. And going into it, he was neither of those before he became the president. He went straight from business to being the president. And so that was a very unique thing. And he admits very frankly and candidly that there were challenges, that he faced a lot of challenges. And
sometimes I'd use it as an excuse. And I don't like having excuses, actually, but I'd use it as an excuse. I had to rely on people that.
Okay, so he's talking here, this clip, he's talking about how he chose the people around him. And much of this section, he talks for about 15 minutes about this. And so I'm kind of picking up in the middle of it. But a lot of what he's saying is he's admitting that he made some mistakes in who he chose. And he's talking about how he chose who he chose and the challenges of doing so. And the president appoints thousands of positions. It's like, how can you do that? It's just, it's not something that any one person can do. And so you have to rely on other people. So he's talking about that. And so I'm going to let him talk.
I respected or liked, but that I didn't know that well because I didn't know them that well. Some of those people I campaigned against because, when you have 18 people, we had mostly politicians running in the election, running in the primaries, and they got knocked out one by one. But I got to like some of them. Some of them I didn't like at all. And I don't like them now. And I'd rely on them and I'd rely on other people. So all of a sudden, people would come in, I'd like to recommend so-and-so to be Secretary of State. And I'd have 3-4 people recommend. One thing I can tell you, everybody wants the position.
Of course.
No, but sometimes I'll hear a lot of people don't want to work with Trump because Trump is tough to work with, et cetera. Let me tell you, everybody wants to be any one of these positions. They die for it.
Of course.
Now, they don't want to be known. I mean, there's a particular guy in New York, primarily.
This has got to be Mike Bloomberg.
Very big, very successful, very strong, very political, although he's not a politician. He'd give anything to be Secretary of State, but if they ask him, no, I don't think I would do it. But in the meantime, begging for it, okay, begging.
I believe you.
Everybody wants it.
But what I wanted to get
by the
to,
way, no matter what you do, but it's very dangerous to pick somebody outside of a politician because a politician's been basically vetted for years.
Right.
You pick a business guy, and they've never been vetted at all, and they're the head of a big company or something, but they've never been vetted. You know nothing about his personal life. You know nothing about where he's been. When you put him in, it's a little bit dangerous because all of a sudden they get checked up, and you hear things that you're saying, wow, this is not going to work out too well.
Okay, so this is really, really important. The last 30 seconds, I'm going to play it again. But he's saying that when he chose people that were not politicians, that when you choose a politician, they've been vetted naturally by their voters. And it sounds crazy to us, right? To normal people who see almost every politician as a hypocrite and a liar. This sounds absolutely crazy to us. But the reality is that politician is not going to have crazy skeletons in their closet because by the time they get elected, with rare exceptions, by the time they've been elected, served in office, been through all that, everything's already out in the public eye. So there's no surprises. There's no there's no damning surprises that are going to come from a politician. So the politician is the safe choice. But when you get somebody that has lived mostly a private life and you bring them into the public like that, the likelihood that there's going to be surprises that are going to create negative publicity and all kinds of other things, or that they just aren't going to do their job, or who knows, there's that likelihood. And this is something that what Trump is sharing here, this represents his actual thoughts. I think he's being very sincere and open and very candid in this conversation with Joe Rogan. He's not hiding anything. I really encourage you to listen to the whole conversation. He's not hiding anything. You can tell when people are lying in one, even if they're a really good liar, which I don't think that Trump is, but you can tell that somebody's lying because their stories don't line up with things that they've said in the past or done in the past. That, it's really hard to hold a body of lies, a house of cards together, right? It's going to fall apart ultimately. And I think that everything that Trump is saying in this is very sincere. He's being very candid. And I'll let you listen to this again here.
Of a politician, because a politician's been basically vetted for years.
Right.
You pick a business guy and they've never been vetted at all, and they're the head of a big company or something, but they've never been vetted. You know nothing about his personal life. You know nothing about where he's been. When you put him in, it's a little bit dangerous because all of a sudden they get checked up and you hear things that you're saying, wow, this is not going to work out too well. So it's very dangerous. Picking people that are outside of politics is somewhat dangerous.
So you're kind of stuck in a position where you have to pick established people. And then the problem with established people is established people are already indoctrinated into the system.
And they're stiffs in many cases.
Stiffs.
They're survivors. I find that,
What do you mean by stiffs? When you say stiffs?
A stiff, they don't have nothing. They have nothing. Or they're smart and survive. One little thing. So there was a congressman years before I ran, and I was very close to him. And I needed a license on something, and he was very important in getting the license. But it was a little bit controversial, the license, this particular thing that was being licensed. But I was close to this guy and helped him and everything else. And I went to him, I said, I'd like to have your help. And he said, let me take a look at it. I said, ooh, that's not too good, but I really hope you're going to help. And anyway, he tapped me along for a long period of time and ultimately didn't do it. And I said, you are a stiff. You could have done this thing so easy, etc. But it was controversial. He was in Congress for many years, like 28 years. And, there's a reason when somebody's there for 28 years, you got to be sort of smart.
Right.
You have all the scandals. And I realized he was a survivor.
And so they never do anything controversial. They never take any chances or speak their opinion. It's outside of the... Yeah.
And yet I don't disrespect him for it.
So
I actually respected the guy more in a certain way. I said,
because he did survive.
You know what? He's been there for 28 years, and he made it through. A lot of people don't make it.
Okay, so this is even further proof that Trump is being completely candid in this interview, because he's admitting that he asked a politician, that he gave money to a politician and asked for a favor in terms of helping to get something approved that was kind of gray area. And so much so that the politician didn't want to do it. And he's saying, I admired this politician for saying no. Like, this is a liar that wants only themselves to look good. They're not going to say this. I mean, President Trump is a very unique person. You talk about a unicorn. This is as honest as it gets from somebody that's running for president of the United States a week before the election. He is just putting himself out there. He's not hiding anything. He's being completely authentic. I think this is a complete and total breath of fresh air. But he's saying some things that I think should really challenge us. How could he have known who to choose? He delegated the decisions on his cabinet the first time that he was president, 2017, to Reince Priebus and Mike Pence, who were Koch guys. And I've talked about this in previous shows. And they ended up screwing him big time. And I don't think that he knew that that was going to happen. I think that he was hoping for the best. Like Tucker said earlier in the clip that I just shared, Trump, I mean, he has been more wronged by more people than I probably you or I or anybody ever would be. You know, he has more reason to hate people than just about anyone, to hold grudges, and yet he doesn't. And I think he's a really unique guy, and I think, you know, that's a leader, and I think that that's the kind of leader that I think we can all aspire to. This doesn't mean that we're putting him on a pedestal. This doesn't mean that we're making him an idol. He's a man. He makes mistakes. He's a sinner like the rest of us, and I don't honestly think that he is a saved Christian. Maybe he is. I don't know. It's not really my place to judge, but I don't worship him. I don't think that he's infallible. He's not, you know, he's not my cult leader. He can be wrong. And if I see him being wrong, I'll call him out. Sure. But, you know, I think he's being really honest. It is hard to choose good people. And especially in the higher levels of government, it's really hard. And he has, through trial and error, he's discovered how to form a good team in politics. And that's where I think, you know, this all comes down to is he calls it loyalty. And part of it's, you know, gut instinct, but he knows how to choose. You know, he's chosen bad people. And just like you say here, Melanie, good people can change too. Absolutely. You know, we live in a fallen world, and it's never going to be perfect. And, you know, anybody who preaches some sort of message of utopia, especially through politics, is a liar and a thief. It's not possible. And Trump's certainly not doing that. So I think what he's doing is he's showing, okay, you know, I'm going to just do the best that I can. I'm going to bring the best people that I can. And I don't think he's going to tolerate what the kind of betrayal that happened before. I think he's got a much better plan and strategy. He knows what to expect better than any presidential candidate, I believe, ever has. He knows exactly what to expect, and he knows what's against him, and he's got a plan. And I think he's wise not to share all of his plan, to keep much of it close to the chest, to, you know, to keep his cards close to the chest. And, you know, I pray for him, and I think we all should. And I think he's going to win. I really, really think he's going to win. We have, so Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Of the swing states, if he gets those three states, just those three states, he's got 270. Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. Early voting has been enormous in all three of those states. On top of that, in Arizona, right now, Trump is ahead, or Republicans are ahead by a sizable majority in Arizona and Nevada. We'll know here in the upcoming days. You know, it's more difficult here in Michigan because we don't have party registration. So, you know, you don't know how, of the people who voted, or how many are Republicans or Democrats. You don't know because they're just they're not registered by party because we have open primaries here. So, you know, you've got Arizona and Nevada. So if Trump didn't win any one of Georgia, North Carolina, or Pennsylvania, and he won Arizona and Nevada, which he's ahead of right now in early voting. And if Trump is ahead, if he's winning in early voting before election day, it's over. He's got that state. I don't see how they can take it away from him. He's going to be too big to rig. I really believe that. And Trump's team in 2020, he did not have the legal support. That's why he ended up having to put his hope and trust there in Giuliani, who made huge mistakes, and was trusting Sidney Powell and listening to Sidney Powell and Flynn and Patrick Byrne, and there's so much. Giuliani was not equipped for that. He's past his prime. He was not who he was when he was the mayor of New York City. When at this time, he just was not the same man that he was then. And I understand Trump loves the man, and I think he's worthy of Trump's love, but he was not the right man for that job. And it is night and day. He didn't have a team. Trump's got a team. He's got a team of pros. I met many of them today. He's got absolute pros working for him in every swing state. They are ready. They're looking for the fraud. And they're, because of that, it's going to be a lot harder to cheat. And so there's still a lot more to come. We've got a lot of water to still flow under the bridge here in the next just 8 days. But we're down to the wire, and whatever you can do, go out and do it. If it's not too late to become a poll challenger, poll watcher, it's too late to become a poll worker in most places. You can go out and knock on doors. You can go find even a local candidate that you can help. And you can join, you can help with phone banks. There is no shortage. Contact your local Republican Party. There is no shortage of things that you can do. So do whatever you can. Even little things will help. So, and I know many of you are probably listening that doing, Melody, I know you're doing just amazing work. So many people are doing really good work, and it takes a lot of work to win hearts and minds and to get people to go out and vote. And so vote early, avoid any drama on the election day. Let's beat Kamala Harris. Let's beat the Democrats across the board before we even get to election day. But above all, examine your heart. And if there's any hatred towards people who disagree with you, towards people of different ethnicities or religions, towards rhinos, towards Flynn, towards Ivan Raiklin, who I believe he is deliberately trying to sink Trump and destroy this country. And but there's no room for hate. So let's seek out hate within our own hearts, and let's really work at being models with each other and with others on how to be kind even as we disagree, especially on social media. It's it's a wild world. So I thank you all. There's really good things coming. I know it. And I don't think that we as the American people are going to take the bait that the bad guys are giving to us and feeding us. So until next time, on Wednesday, I am going to have a great guest. And I will, he is a state legislator. His name is Kwang Yen actually from my old county in Yavapai County, Arizona. And he's got an amazing story to tell, just his life story. He's an amazing man. I have huge respect for Kwang. And also he's got, he's done a lot of research on something that's happening in red states in particular in this election, which is propositions to put together ranked choice voting and or jungle primaries, which are really, it would be the end. It would make red states into blue states almost overnight. So we're going to talk about that and how in Arizona, it's a particular sticky and dangerous and bad situation. And so hopefully that fails, and hopefully we can make just a little tiny dent in that. So that's what we're going to be doing on Wednesday. And I think that this really is an existential election, and it's not just because of Trump, it's because of the other stuff that's on the ballot too. So we're going to talk about that on Wednesday. So until then, thank you very much.